While executions in the United States have recently become relatively rare, February 2025 saw multiple death row inmates face their final moments. From chilling last words to carefully chosen last meals, these executions provide a glimpse into the final hours of those sentenced to death. Here are the prisoners who were executed in February 2025, along with their last meals and final statements. Demetrius Terrence Frazier. State, Alabama. Date of execution, February 6, 2025. Demetrius Terrence Frazier was born in Michigan on October 29, 1972. Frazier, who had one sister, was raised by his mother Carol, but he was neglected as a child. He was also in custody of social services at one point. As a child, Frazier would often sneak out of his house to commit petty offenses. Frazier dropped out of high school at a young age. As a juvenile, Frazier was dealt with by the law for carrying concealed weapons and also violated his probation for both carrying concealed weapons and breaking and entering. At one point, Frazier was detained at the W.J. Maxey Boys Training School, a juvenile correctional facility in Michigan for adolescents and young adults aged between 12 and 21. Frazier obtained a GED during his stay at the detention center. Between 1999 and 1992, Demetrius Terrence Frazier, then 19 years old, had committed 2 murders in Michigan and Alabama, respectively. Demetrius Terrence Frazier. From October 29, 1972 to February 6, 2025 was an American convicted murderer and serial rapist executed in Alabama for the 1991 murder of 40-year-old Pauline Brown after a robbery on November 27, 1991. Frazier confessed to Brown's murder after his arrest in Detroit, Michigan, for the 1992 murder of 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick in Michigan, whom he had shot to death while attempting to rape the girl. Besides his 2 murder convictions, Frazier was suspected of raping 8 other women in Michigan and was tried and found guilty of 2 of those by a Wayne County jury. For the murder of Brown, Frazier was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in Alabama in 1996. He was also given multiple life sentences in 1993 for the murder of Kendrick and other offenses he committed in Michigan. He spent over 18 years at the Alger Correctional Facility in Michigan until 2011, when he was transferred to the Holman Correctional Facility in Alabama, home to the state's death row. Frazier was executed by nitrogen hypoxia on February 6, 2025, after being imprisoned over 32 years. On October 19, 2024, a request for Frazier's death warrant to be issued was made, and on January 7, 2025, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey scheduled Demetrius Frazier's execution date as February 6, 2025. In February 2025, Frazier filed a federal appeal to bar the state from carrying out his execution by nitrogen hypoxia until the state agreed to his request to amend certain parts of the protocol to facilitate his nitrogen gas execution. Frazier's lawyers argued that the prior 3 executions showed that the nitrogen gas executions did not guarantee an immediate loss of consciousness before death and a painless death, given that there were witness accounts of 3 offenders having experienced conscious suffocation, convulsions, and sudden involuntary movements on the gurney. However, the state officials refuted Frazier's claims and stated that the nitrogen gas executions did not have any major problems per Frazier's arguments. On February 6, 2025, 52-year-old Demetrius Terrence Frazier was put to death by nitrogen hypoxia. About 26 minutes after the execution procedure commenced, Frazier was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. Frazier was said to have made a few gasping breaths at first before it transitioned to a series of sporadic breaths, and he ceased all movements at 6:21 p.m. It was confirmed that Frazier no longer had any heartbeat 13 minutes after the gas was first released. In his final statement, Frazier apologized to the surviving friends and family members of Brown, stating that the death of Brown should not have happened. Frazier also suggested that the media should contact a former detective from Michigan, claiming he made a false confession about the murder of Crystal Kendrick, His last two words were, "Let's go." Frazier's final meal consisted of a meal from Taco Bell, a beefy 5-layer burrito, a chicken chalupa supreme, beef crunchy tacos, chips and dip, and a Mountain Dew. Frazier also received a final visit from his mother, sister, and counsel before the death sentence was carried out. Stephen Nelson, State, Texas. Date of execution, February 5, 2025. On March 3, 2011, Stephen LeWayne Nelson, then 24 years old, entered North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, with the intent to commit robbery. Inside, he encountered Pastor Clint Dobson, age 28, and the church's secretary, 67-year-old Judy Elliott. Nelson attacked both individuals, severely beating them. He suffocated Pastor Dobson by placing a plastic bag over his head, resulting in the pastor's death. Elliott was left critically injured, but survived the assault. Nelson fled the scene in Elliott's vehicle, taking with him stolen items including Dobson's laptop and cell phone, as well as Elliott's credit cards. Nelson was apprehended 2 days later, found in possession of the victim's belongings and Elliott's stolen vehicle. Bloodstains on his shoes matched the DNA of both Dobson and Elliott, and his fingerprints were found at the crime scene. On October 2012, Nelson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. During the sentencing phase, evidence was presented of Nelson's violent behavior while incarcerated, including the alleged murder of a fellow inmate, though he was not formally charged for this act. On February 5, 2025, at the age of 37, Stephen LeWayne Nelson was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. Prior to his execution, Nelson addressed his wife, expressing love and gratitude, and stated, "I'm not scared. I'm at peace. Let's ride, Warden." He did not request a special last meal and instead ate the standard prison meal served that day. Nelson's execution sparked debates among various Christian communities regarding the death penalty. Some opposed the execution on moral and religious grounds, organizing vigils and calling for clemency, while others supported it as a just consequence for his actions. Despite appeals citing ineffective legal representation and mitigating factors such as a history of childhood abuse and trauma, Nelson's conviction and sentence were upheld, and his execution proceeded as scheduled. Richard Lee Tabler, State, Texas. Date of execution, February 2025. Richard Lee Tabler was born on February 5, 1979 in Tulare County, California. His early life was marked by familial instability and neglect. His parents, Robert and Lorraine, had a troubled marriage. Robert's frequent absences due to work, infidelity, and alcohol consumption, coupled with Lorraine's demanding work schedule, resulted in Richard often being left under the care of his older siblings. This lack of parental attention contributed to a challenging childhood. At the age of 10, his mother left the family, further disrupting his upbringing. Richard's academic performance suffered. He struggled with attention issues, leading to a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder at the age of 12. He repeated the 3rd grade and had difficulty forming friendships, often feeling isolated. Despite being described by family members as good-natured, he was noted to have a quick temper. In his adult years, Richard was engaged to a woman who had a daughter from a previous relationship, but the engagement ended prior to his arrest. In 2004, Tabler orchestrated a plan to murder his former employer, Mohammed Amine Ramouni, the manager of a strip club in Killeen, Texas. On November 26, 2004, Tabler lured Ramouni and his friend, Haitham Zayed, to a secluded area under the pretense of selling them stereo equipment. Upon their arrival, Tabler shot and killed both men. 2 days later, on November 28, Tabler murdered 2 teenage girls, Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Lorraine Dotson, who were dancers at the same club, believing they had linked him to the previous murders. On February 23, 2025, Richard Lee Tabler, age 46, was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas, for the 2004 murders of Mohammed Amin Ramouni and Haitham Zayed. Tabler was arrested in November 2004 and subsequently confessed to the murders. In April 2007, he was convicted of capital murder for the deaths of Ramouni and Zayed and sentenced to death. Although indicted for the murders of Benefield and Dotson, he was not tried for their deaths. Prior to his execution, Tabler expressed remorse, stating, "There is not a day that goes by that I don't regret my actions. I had no right to take your loved ones from you, and I ask and pray, hope and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me for those actions." He was pronounced dead at 6:38 p.m. CST Tabler's case attracted attention due to his use of a smuggled cell phone in 2008 to make threatening calls, including to a Texas state senator, which led to a statewide prison lockdown. Additionally, he vacillated between seeking execution and pursuing appeals, raising questions about his mental competence. Despite appeals citing inadequate legal representation and mental health concerns, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene, and the execution proceeded as scheduled. James Dennis Ford, State, Florida. Date of execution, February 13, 2025. James Dennis Ford was born on July 23, 1960, into a household marked by dysfunction and emotional instability. His early life was marred by the presence of an alcoholic father and the absence of his mother, who abandoned the family when Ford was only 14 years old. Despite the challenges at home, Ford and his father shared a notably close relationship. After leaving school, Ford worked alongside his father as a cemetery caretaker, a job that seemed to provide a sense of structure and purpose in his otherwise chaotic life. However, when Ford's father died at the age of 52, the loss devastated him deeply. According to testimony from his first wife and several friends, Ford's descent into alcoholism began shortly after his father's death. By his early 20s, he was reportedly drinking heavily, at times consuming as many as 24 cans of beer a day. While Ford's adult life spiraled into addiction, those who knew him maintained that he had no significant criminal record and was generally considered a non-violent man. Friends and family described him as someone struggling internally, but not prone to outward aggression. It was this contrast between his troubled, yet relatively quiet life and the brutality of the crime he later committed that shocked those close to him. His descent into alcoholism and unresolved emotional trauma from childhood were later cited during his trial as mitigating factors that may have influenced his behavior at the time of the murders. Still, the weight of his actions ultimately outweighed the sympathy his background might have garnered, leading to a death sentence that would mark the final chapter of a life shaped by loss, addiction, and emotional turmoil. On April 6, 1997, James Ford invited his coworker, 25-year-old Gregory Malnery, and Gregory's 26-year-old wife, Kimberly, to a remote sod farm in Charlotte County, Florida, under the pretense of a fishing trip. The couple brought along their 22-month-old daughter, Miranda. Once at the location, Ford ambushed Gregory, shooting him in the head, bludgeoning him with a shovel, and slitting his throat. Kimberly attempted to flee and secure her daughter in the truck, but Ford caught her, sexually assaulted her, and then shot her to death. Their toddler, Miranda, witnessed the aftermath and was found nearly 18 hours later, dehydrated and covered in blood inside the truck. Ford was arrested shortly after the murders and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as charges related to sexual battery and child abuse. In June 1999, he was convicted on all counts. Due to the brutality of the murders and the vulnerability of the victims, the court sentenced Ford to death. He spent over 2 decades on Florida's death row, filing numerous appeals, including claims of intellectual disability and ineffective counsel, but all were denied. On the day of his execution, James Ford declined to give a verbal final statement, but left a written note that read, "Hugs, prayers, love. God bless everyone." For his last meal, Ford requested fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and a Coke. James Ford was executed by lethal injection at 6:19 p.m. at Florida State Prison. He was 64 years old at the time of his death. The prisoners, executed in February 2025, left behind chilling stories, from their last meals to their final words. These cases remind us of the complexities surrounding the death penalty and the human side of justice. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime insights.